Hello, everyone. It is the Ego Project. I am Lisa Heidle, and I'm here with
Cristine Seidell.
And we have a guest today that we are just thrilled about, and this is Rhys-Thorvald Hansen. And Rhys, welcome. We are so happy to have you with us.
Thank you, Lisa and Cristine. I'm so happy to be here with you both.
Thank you. We are going to be delving into the ego and gender identity today. And I'm going to share a little bit about Rhys. Rhys is a non-binary artist, entrepreneur, and settler of Welsh and Norwegian ancestry. They live and work in Coast Salish territories within the intersections of land justice, food systems, and community care. They are passionate about cooperative enterprise and arts as a vehicle for social change. Okay, and that's taken from their bio. And Rhys, do you have anything to add to
that? No, I just super stoked to be here. And I guess the only thing I would add is sort of like really bring a sort of like large cross-section of ideas that have influenced how I think about things, because I've worked in a lot of different industries and with a lot of different types of people. So that's a bit of what my bio tries to capture, sharing like, this is my lens, which is a bit of a macro lens.
It is such a macro lens. And I've actually, full disclosure, I've known Rhys for a few years now, and they are one of my besties. I'm not going to lie
to you. Same friend.
Oh, thank you. And, you know, I want to share a little bit more about what I pulled off of your website and discuss this, because I think this really encompasses what I know about you. And it was so beautifully put on your website. In their work, they practice generosity, transparency, as well as enthusiasm for learning and growth. As a tenacious and creative colleague invested in other people's success, they value seeing and supporting others' big dreams. They always bring their whole self, skills, and experiences into their projects and invite others to do the same. And when I read that, I was like, yes, that is that. And you bring that to every interaction I've ever had with you and I've ever witnessed you having. So, you know, can you talk a little bit about your authenticity journey and how through gender identification that has evolved?
That's a really meaty question. You might have to like break it down in a couple parts and so go around. But just like on like the first step, as far as like bringing your whole and authentic self, there's a lot of cultural pressure to conform to norms or to sort of like slot yourself into like easily digestible forms, both like for capitalism, but then also for like people's relational comfort or cultural comfort. And it just seems like such a waste of energy to me. Like if you're spending like 20% of your energy like holding yourself back, like how are we supposed to figure out the solutions to anything that we're working together? Like you're going to be working 20% less efficiently. And that's like a really easy thing to say, but of course harder to do, because there are consequences always to how we show up, both positive and negative. Right. But to like tie it to sort of to gender identity and like the way that I came into my gendered self as a non-binary person, and I'll add some flavor that I don't usually add like in conversations with cisgender people, but I do with other trans people, because we like to like layer things. Like I consider myself a trans masculine non-binary person, like masculine of center, and I'm happy to talk more later about what that means. But like that's the lens I'm bringing. Like as I was figuring that out, part of why I can speak to like the energy that took is I realized that like so much of my energy was focused on trying to hold myself within a container that didn't fit. I've also often used the metaphor of like growing up like a bonsai tree, like coming in a bonsai and like not even realizing that I had been shaped by these cultural forces or family forces to kind of grow in a particular way. And that isn't necessarily the way that would be my natural growth for myself. And once I began to like break free of that and realize like how much more of myself I could have for me, I could have for my work, I could have for my community, it just became really like unacceptable. I was like, I can't, why would I bother to do this, especially when so much of it is about putting other people's comfort above my own. And it's not especially effective, like, because people still pick up that there's like things going on and they react to that and the energy of that. So yeah, I just am sort of like, why would I hold myself back? Like, who does that serve? How would that actually work towards our goals? And because I like to hold a little bit of like chaotic good energy, like how can I like play in that discomfort and other people's discomfort, like for our shared goals? How can I get us out of our own ways?
And I've been witness to that as well.
And participated.
And participated at times.
Yeah, that's so fun. Yeah. I love that. You know what, Rhys, I love that you said, being able to sit in some of that chaotic good energy, to sit in the discomfort and almost invite others to sit in the discomfort with you, to be able to share in that growth. Like, I think that's actually a conversation I was having earlier today, how much we avoid discomfort, but to be somebody who's willing to invite people into that discomfort with you, says, hey, I'm safe enough to be able to sit in this with you, and I'm present enough because I've been doing some of that work for myself, that I can sit in this with you. So I think that's a beautiful gift we can give to others as a collective, as we start kind of doing the deconditioning of where we've been as a society for a while.
I was just sharing with a colleague that like, it's one of the blessings, in my opinion, about being transgender is that you are faced so quickly with so many people being uncomfortable around you that you, like, just out of survival, kind of have to a certain extent, learn to like not care what other people think, and like, be aware of like how they're responding to things that are outside of your control. And I was like, well, this is going to be happening, so I might as well like lean into that and lean into the discomfort and vulnerability. Because it's going to be happening whether I want it to be or not.
Right. Whether you're consciously showing up to be in that with other people, it's there. So get comfortable with it so you can move through it as a teacher. I love that.
Yeah.
The writer Kimmy Neckpaville, she wrote Power and the Art of Asking, and she, based on her life experience of being fostered in the UK from Nigeria and being one of the only people of color in a very white population, said that she realized that she either would never belong anywhere or she would have to belong everywhere. Wow. And I wonder if that's been part of your journey as well, owning the space that you're in unapologetically. Is that part of your journey?
Yeah, maybe. I think it's more that like it's really easy, cisgender people, meaning people who match their assigned gender from birth, take it for granted, like the comfort of being in spaces around all cisgender people all the time. And I was, I think, 26, 27 before I was in a room with two other non-binary people, just two, And so it's like, it's almost the opposite, where my experience is mostly of not belonging in a space. And so I have to create my own sense of belonging within that space, because it's not going to be offered. And it's a really like rare and special treat to get to spend time with other people who have those shared experiences with me, as opposed to like the daily way that I walk around the world.
Wow.
Well, and your journey's, it's unique to you, no one has, no two people have the same one. But are you comfortable speaking a little bit about your journey and where you find yourself today? That is, where you are today. Of course, you're still continuing, but your gender identity journey and the choices that you've made along the way.
Yeah, I guess like it's sort of big. So I'm gonna like go a little bit big picture and then feel free to dial in, but just kind of, to help people understand the perspective that I'm speaking from. Um, I was raised and socialized as a woman and didn't start to figure out that I might not be a cisgender heterosexual woman until I was in college. And I was like fortunate enough to get to study abroad for a year, first in the Caribbean in Trinidad and Tobago, and then later I went and did a Himalayan studies program and got to travel around there. And I was really disconnected from my friends, my family, romantic partners that I had at the time, and spent a lot of time by myself. So it was like great for kind of, challenging my ideas around the world and around what non-US places were like, but then also challenging my own understanding of myself away from anybody who had ever known me before, any of the assumptions that they had about me. And so that's kind of when I started to figure out that I was queer and that I had attraction to more than just men. And once I started to sort of go down that rabbit hole, I don't know, it can like shift your whole lens of understanding. Like it's like having a completely different frame. And so once you can build your skill in looking at that frame, then you start to examine other parts of your life. And this is kind of the gift of it, is like once you start to deconstruct your sexuality, it can be easier to deconstruct your gender. And once you've deconstructed those and sort of pulled out the pieces that really work for you, then it's really easy to apply that deconstruction lens to everything and be like, what of this is working for me and do I want to keep, and what parts of it do I not? So along that way, I came out as queer in my late teens, early 20s, and started dating women and other trans folks. And then I kept like sort of digging in, and I was really in this sort of crisis of like understanding that womanhood in the US white supremacist culture is like really prescriptive. And I knew that it didn't fit well for me, but I really struggled for several years to be like, am I a woman who fits outside of like the prescriptive womanhood, or am I something else? And I was really open, like with my friends and community about like, I don't know, am I just like a really masculine woman? Am I part of butch culture? Or is there something else going on here? I eventually decided, I came to the conclusion, I was like, oh, I think I'm a transgender man. And I sought testosterone and was on testosterone for a while and lived as a trans man for like three to 5 years ish. And was like really welcomed warmly in my community and mostly treated as a man by the people that knew me. And then after I did that for several years, I was like, oh, actually, I was just trading one set of bullshit for a different set of bullshit.
I love that.
I don't like this bullshit either. Like this is also a stupid box that like hurts the people who are crammed into it. And so I was, and you have to understand that like non-binariness now is like very much in the cultural zeitgeist, but it was not a word that I heard until I was 25. And it was like, I was deep chronically online, like I was following all of this. But I didn't even know that it was an option. I didn't know it was an option to say like, thanks, but no thanks. And it wasn't until I settled down and came to be partnered with the person that I'm married to now, and sort of like was put in this place of really evaluating. And I was like, I don't want either of the, I just want to take the parts of this that I like the most from each of them and like leave the parts of both of them that I'm not interested in. And I'll build on one more piece of this. Then through that, I also felt really a lot of cultural pressure to match the cultural identities of what androgyny is, which is very masculine coded. And so it was a lot of like, keep your hair short, do all these things. I have a really like a body that is read as very feminine by lots of people. And so I was like, well, I have to counterbalance that, but like taking all of these steps. And it's really only the last couple of years that I'm like, the fact that you think that long hair is a girl thing is a you problem, and it's not really a me problem. I like having long hair. So, I like wearing earrings. I think that everybody should be able to wear them and not have that be gendered. But it took me a little while to like get comfortable enough to not feel like I owed, again, this sort of like cis hetero patriarchy, like white supremacist idea of like what androgyny looks like and doesn't look like.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. And you know, something that I'm hearing a lot of your story, and we've talked a little bit on the Ego Project about this, is really this kind of, you know, leaning into, you know, the culture and it telling you you need to be something regardless of what you're trying, right? But then you're pulling back in yourself to kind of say, okay, how does this feel to me? Almost like this leaning into the culture, but then always pulling back to self to spend that alone time and reflection. You know, we've talked a lot about that on the Ego Project, how important it is as we navigate a healthy relationship with ourselves. And then, you know, with others, whether it's the society or partners or parents or peers, whatever it is, the need to pull back in and spend that alone time and reflection. And it sounds like you had like physical alone time by like, you know, going and studying abroad, but these regular seasons of coming back within yourself to spend that time alone before jumping back out and making, you know, this final decision on things, which I think so much of our ego tells us we have to fit into something. You know, you have to check some box. So I'm curious, you know, in ego work, you know, so much of identity, how has, you know, doing that work and ultimately coming to a place where it's like, I choose no single identity, but to have the permission to be fluid almost, right? You know, how has that kind of allowed you to have a healthier relationship with yourself and others?
Well, I think a thing that comes out to me on that cycle is like, it's really tempting to intellectualize all of these things. But of course, that like at its core, in many ways, being transgender is an embodied experience. And the trans body experience and a lot of our body experiences come with a lot of trauma that can like, you know, cause a lot of freeze, cause a lot of fun, you know, that sort of thing. And it takes time to like scaffold and build trust with yourself, to learn how to like listen to your cues again. So it's been really important for me in that cycle to like continually practice better listening to like, not just like what I'm good at, but what actually brings me joy, what actually brings me fulfillment, to not feel pressure to, you know, to like arrive at a final decision with something, but like continue to stay green and growing and evolve as my needs evolve, as my communities evolve, as our understanding of how we can show up evolves.
Yeah.
I feel like I didn't actually answer your question. Can you?
No,
can you
no, you did. You 100%
Okay.
did. What I heard you say was, you know, being able to come to yourself and give yourself permission and have grace with yourself to not have to be something right away is allowing you to show up with other people and know that you have permission internally and have the patience with people to be able to, you know, give that space to grow. Just because you did it ultimately, and are doing it with you.
Yeah, and people take gender so deadly seriously, and like it's like partly because that's like where developmentally humans develop our ideas around it, but also like when you realize that you like don't need to take it that seriously, like I don't know, it just like can take a lot of pressure off to like sort of like make declarations or think that something is right or needs to stay unchanging because you're like, I don't know, like, did you pick an outfit when you were 4 years old and that's the only outfit that you are allowed to wear for the rest of forever? That seems silly. So like, why would other parts of your life also need to be like something that you arrived at such a younger version of yourself?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, think about when we're born, the first thing they say is it's a boy, it's a girl, right? Like right away, you are compartmentalized. Fascinating. Yeah.
Well, and you know, you use the word of deconstruction there. And I think, you know, you put language around what we all do all the time if we have a growth mindset, right? We reach these places in our lives where we're like, oh, I feel different than I did 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. In whatever area it is, you know, whether it's career, whether it's relationship, whether it's with self, and we deconstruct that. and we break it down and we, take the pieces, we look at it, and then we start building it back up. Now, a question I have for you is, you've made a place in a lot of different communities. And as we know, as human beings, we love to compartmentalize, right? We love, okay, you're part of this group now, right? And it's also part of our innate desire and a need to belong. And we're always craving that, right? We want to know we're okay, we belong, we found our tribe, right? So you've gone into these communities identifying as them, as you said, as a lesbian, as non-binary, as, your race, cisgender, right? And so can you speak a little bit about allowing yourself to move in and out of communities and the reception that you've received when you've entered them and when you've maybe moved into a new one?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, I think belonging is really important. A lot of people are a lot more comfortable if they feel like they can sort of categorize you. And from my perspective, that comes a lot from like the function of gender in our culture. Like what does gender do? A lot of what gender does is tell people how to be in relationship with each other. They want to know what your gender is because they want to know the rules of politeness with you. They also want to know where you rank against them in the power structure, and whether they can leverage that or not. And so people get really upset when they don't know how to categorize you in that way, and will project a lot of that onto you. And I don't know, it just sort of like breaks the code like so much. I'm going to keep coming back to white supremacy culture because I feel like gender and white supremacy culture are like so entwined that I can't really talk about them separately, like the way that we live these days. But like people are so like so much of white culture is about like, yeah, figuring out, the small talk is around like, where do you work and where do you live? It's about accessing your class to like figure out how they can relate with you around that. And so much of that gender, people get really upset if they don't have that information, because one of the worst things that we can do in white culture is be impolite to people. Like it's worse to be impolite than it is to cause harm in lots of ways. And so people are really upset that they don't know the politeness rules because, oh no, what if you accuse them of something? They want to insulate themselves from any potential conflict.
Well, it's interesting when you're talking about politeness in white culture. And yeah, I was raised in the Midwest, and then I spent a good decade in the South. And as Cristine knows, being in the South, it's about politeness and courtesy, and there's roles for males and females, and I have this behavior where I never want someone to feel like they're causing me any type of inconvenience. So if they want to talk to me, I'll stand there for hours and listen, as opposed to not hurt their feelings and to not be perceived as someone who's rude. And I will just stand there. And I was like, oh, that's something that's just been, I was taught, you never just walk away, and that's part of, my growth that I'm working on, is being able to say, this is great. I'd love to catch up more. Why don't we schedule a time, or have lunch next week, and actually mean that. So I understand that those rules that we live by. So I definitely understand that. Yeah.
It's always the question of like, who do those rules serve? Like, who are those rules insulating? Who are they insulating? What are they insulating? Why? Who benefits from that? And there's a lot of freedom in embracing the ability to be a rule breaker and keep your power as much as possible for yourself.
Okay. Well, and I'm going to, part of that mannerism here, it looks like Cristine is freezing up a little bit. So Rhys, you and I will continue the conversation, and Cristine will take, what Mercury in retrograde is hitting us hard, and she's going to sign back in if she can. And if not, then Rhys and I will continue, and then we will schedule another conversation. So, but I love that you and I talk a lot about stillness, and as Cristine was saying, about bringing that back into yourself and the struggles that you work through, and being able to get still and listen to yourself. Can you talk a little bit about how you use that in your decision making?
Oh, sorry, distracted by the sound for a moment. I think I'm going to take this from a slightly different lens than you think, because I want to name what allowed me to find stillness, and that was class access. Like I didn't have the space to have stillness in my 20s to do a lot of that reflection, because I was in survival mode, because I was worried about my electricity getting turned off, and I was worried about having enough food, and I was trying to hold all of those things. And so that's part of why that sort of like that contracts into your body, and you like hold it, and you hold it in your muscles for sort of years. And it wasn't until I got married and had access to another economic class that allowed leisure, that allowed more time for me to pause and say, this is not for me, this work is not for me, without the danger of losing my housing or my livelihood or all of those kinds of things. So I think that that's a really important piece to hold, and like who has access to the spaciousness for reflection, and who doesn't. And a lot of, I think, trauma responses that show up in our culture has to do with like who has had the space to seek healing from that, who has had the space to be held by their community while they work through things.
Thank you so much for saying that, because that's so true, right? Like if you're, like you said, worried about your electricity bill, your electric being turned off, or, feeding your kids, whatever, being able, to catch 3 buses to get to your job, there isn't a lot of time and space for reflection. And I've been in that situation as well, where, I'm in survival mode. I don't have time to, be worrying about, what am I feeling in the moment? I have to keep hustling. So thank you for saying that. And you're absolutely right. Yeah. And that's a good differentiation for you. You have that.
Yeah. And it's not that people are not able to like do that within poverty, because we see a lot of examples of culture making within it, but it just like, again, that sort of like holding all of these different pieces in the air, and like the pace of self-reflection and internal work that I have been able to have access to is 100% tied to my class and economic status now. And that's part of why I try to come to relationships and culture building with cisgender people with so much graciousness and so much capacity for holding people's mistakes and the impacts of that on me, is because I have this economic class privilege that a lot of other trans people don't have access to.
And now that you have that, you're an artist, and you're able to invest time into your creation. And by the way, the backdrop is some of Rhys's art, as is their shirt, and their art is amazing. Check out their website. I'll put it in the description, but it's also rhys.earth, and you can take a look at their beautiful website. Such a good, and get a better sense of who they are. Using that stillness now, and you live in a very small community that is, allows for nature exploration and being out, in the trees by the water. So can you talk a little bit about how where you are today is impacting, in all areas of your life, is impacting your art and your creations?
Yeah, I think I figured out, in my 20s that I didn't have good boundaries to live in the city, like good energetic boundaries. Like I'm a high enthusiasm person. I love people. I like to go things. It's not so much that I have like FOMO as it is just like there's so many cool things happening. There's so many cool people. Like I want to be at all, but it didn't actually serve me very well. I wasn't making the space for me to take care of myself. It wasn't making the space for me to like invest in my own self growth. So I had to move out like to the countryside, and have more of those things be like a 45-minute to an hour drive away. So I could really think of like, what's the cost benefit of this, you know, for my own energy, for my own tasks. And I grew up here in the Pacific Northwest, on Snohomish lands. That's where I originally grew up, and now I live close to Wasson First Nation and their lands and waterways. But living in this community, it's on a pretty major waterway with a lot of tidal currents, and it exists as kind of a liminal space, which I like as someone who's fond of deconstructing binaries. It's the sort of place that isn't a place, that has these tidal courses that bring things in and also wash them out. And so you'll see kind of those energies, like my sensitivity to those energies, both in terms of ideas and people sort of reflected in the flow from my art. It's really clear to see that my art is really influenced by, you know, topographical understandings of land, but also molecular constructions. And it all really comes from my understanding that we're all interconnected beings. We become free or live incarcerated together. And so, yeah, a mutual liberation is one of my core values. And I think that really shows up in my art and kind of challenging this lens of like, what are the different planes we're living on? What really is the separation between land and animal and self and community, and where are ideas about that separateness getting in our way?
I think with your art, one of the things I love so much about it is you feel the movement in it. Like I never look at any of your pieces in any of your work and feel that it's stagnant. There's always this, you know, the flow to it. You can even see it, you know, on your background, you know, how, you know, the movement there. And I to me, that so represents you, the person I've gotten to know you as, is there's always movement, there's always growth. And if you ever find yourself in a time of stagnancy, you get to work. And sometimes that work is letting it sit. But
yeah, I was gonna say, is that like
yeah.
I'm a big fan of Jenny Odell's. She wrote a book called How to Do Nothing, and like, you know, spaciousness and stillness and unscheduled time as like a creative fountain to be sort of nourished, not just for like creating outward works, but for sort of like diving deeper into your own ideas about how we approach something. So I do tend to like be a little bit of an overscheduler of myself, which is a thing that I'm always sort of working on. Maybe not always doing a very good job of it, but again, high enthusiasm and a lot of care for the different people in our communities and the needs and the people to show up for that. But that's, I think, part of why I've like retreated to living a bit in the middle of the woods. And it's not unusual for me to go for a week to 10 days without seeing anybody besides my partner. And I really have like had to hold that. And it's been really rewarding to do that. Like the pandemic isolation was really challenging, and I like went through many spheres of like positive and negative emotions and positive and negative self. But out of that, I had a really, you know, sort of deeper understanding of like how to keep my own well filled and had like that source spring to do the work that I do out in the world and to show up in the community in the way that I do.
And how does your gender identity impact your creations, your art? Or does it? Or can you differentiate the two?
I don't know that I can be super articulate about it. A word that I use a lot when talking about my art and creative practice is sort of intuitive art. And like part of doing illustration work has been like slowing down to be more attuned to energetic sensations in my body or the world around me, and be sort of still, and then sort of translate that. And there's not very much that I can do without like bringing my gender into it, but it also is sort of like, it's hard to see your own lens on that all the time. I think that the main thing is just sort of like a sort of deep understanding that most binaries are false, and I want to be specific in that sort of like, false doesn't mean that they're not true, but they're not absolute. And so like understanding that there are truths in binaries, but they're not absolute truths, and it is kind of almost always working to see like, okay, here's our understanding of this duality of something. Was that built as a support structure to like support doing something? Is it expedient to think of it that way? Is it not needed to like go to a deeper level of complexity for some level of work? And like, when and where does that scaffolding become a crutch as opposed to a support?
I understand. So if someone was, trying to figure out their gender identity, they're thinking, okay, something, as you said, as you were traveling, you're like, let me deconstruct this a little bit. Let me really look at it. And they're trying to find what resonates for them, what they can embody, if you will. What would be a piece of advice around ego work around that, or ego wounding? So much of our ego work is healing the ego wounding. So how would you guide them? Do you have anything to offer, any questions that they can pose to themselves to help on that journey?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of focus on trans struggle and queer struggle and like hardships that are felt as the community, both like within the community, although less so than it used to be, but like really in a lot of cis straight culture, the sort of like, oh, you've had to navigate this, you're so brave, all of these things. And also some imposter syndrome shows up for people because they're like, oh, I think I might be queer, I think I might be transgender, but I don't want to claim that because I haven't gone through various struggles, or it hasn't had any sort of impact on me in negative ways. And I really want to sort of like flip the narrative on that. And like, what you really, people talk a lot about gender dysphoria, which can be like the discomfort with your own, when I say meat suit, like your own body that you're living in and the way that it's read as our culture. But the counter of that is gender euphoria. And like, when are those moments that make you feel the most gender joy, that make you feel the most in your body, the most perceived by yourself and others? And like, that's the trail to follow. And that I would offer that not just to trans people, because there's a lot of sort of like, oh, trans folks go through this gender journey. Everybody goes through a gender journey. It's just that cisgender people's gender journeys are so normative that we like don't pay attention to them, or the attention we do pay is to try and get people to like follow that same path. But everyone has things that bring them gender euphoria, and it can just be more striking for trans people because of like the sort of contrast with larger cultural things.
Well, and I love that, because it's like, notice the euphoria and do more of that.
Yeah.
Right? Really,
Yeah.
just do more of that, because it feels
if you
good.
feel like clothing and accessories and adorning yourself and like can be an act of like self-love and care, and like if you have outfits that like make you feel like powerful, embodied in yourself and seen, like do more of that as much as possible. If you have, if there are gendered roles in the household, and you really love doing some of them, like is there ways to affirm that as like part of your gender expression, or gender roles, as opposed to kind of prescriptive ideas of who does what.
Oh, that's so good. Well, I hate that we lost Cristine, and I know that she's just heartbroken about it. We would love to have you back in the future. Would that be something you'd be interested in?
Yeah, absolutely. I know you and I've had so many conversations. I was so excited to have Cristine be part of it too. So I'm looking forward to continuing back with her.
Oh, well, we thank you so much. And once again, check out Rhys's website, rhys.earth, and their art, which is just stunning. I love it. And we know that you're going to be creating more things and doing so many more amazing things in the community and the world at large. So thank you.
Thank you. You're a very kind friend.
All right. All right. So once again, we lost Cristine today. You know, her Zoom locked up on her, but that's okay. She will be back with the Ego Project with the next episode, as well as Rhys will be joining us in the future. So once again, make sure to like and subscribe and share. We so appreciate it. And we'll see you next time. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.